Welcome to Opening Soon, a podcast where we interview retail founders about how they started and run their brick and mortar businesses. I'm your host, Alan Lee. I run Signs and Mirrors, where we make beautiful signs and furniture for retail stores. I also help run Photolab, a self-portrait studio with locations in New York City and Houston. Today's guest, Bobby Kellman, is the founder of Enclave, a suburban co-working space that started near Chicago. Bobby previously worked on presidential campaigns and worked at Uber, helping with public policy and government affairs for nearly 8 years. In this episode, we dive into how Bobby discovered the need for Enclave while commuting an hour into Chicago each day, bootstrapped the first location with just $65,000, and raised over $6 million to open 100 locations by 2027 and thousands more over the next decade. This is a great episode for those considering raising venture for their brick and mortar business and understanding the strings that come with the money. Bobby, it's so great to have you on the Opening Soon podcast. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Well, before we dive into Enclave, I would love to hear a little bit more about your background. I know that you have quite an interesting one, having spent some time at Uber, living in the Middle East. Tell me about what brought you here today.
I guess it's a convoluted path, but the short version is I always wanted to start something of my own, but I actually started my career in all things, or of all things, I should say, in politics. So working on different political campaigns, starting in about 2006 up in Maryland, and then running around all over the country for a few years and working on the 2008 presidential. And then after that campaign was done, I didn't want to work in government, so I ended up taking a consulting job in the Middle East based out of Dubai, doing the types of government or some more politics campaign style consulting in the region. A lot of governments there very much want their people to enjoy the benefits of oil wealth, but how do they do that? How do they deploy it? So there's a lot of different types of campaigns to run over there. But ended up staying there for a few years and then moving back to Chicago to actually work for the mayor of Chicago for a brief moment in time, and then found my way to Uber as a relatively early Uber employee on their government affairs team. My job was to help make ride sharing legal in various states, along with introducing new products. And as that scaled and I became more engrossed in the business world, and became very enchanted, I should say, with the idea of starting my own business, something venture-backed, employed tech. And so in early 2020, opened up Enclave, a Suburban Coworking company.
What did you learn at Uber and politics, and how did that help you start Enclave?
I think political campaigns and startups, particularly startups like Uber, unicorn growing as fast as anything could, that almost devotion to speed is a similarity. And so political campaigns, there will be a day where everyone will vote. And on that day, one side wins everything and the other loses everything. And in some ways, that same mentality pervades startups where, if we thought at the time that if we ran harder, worked better, worked smarter, all of it, that we could win the space, but we were terrified that other companies, whether competitors overseas or Lyft here in the US, could eat our lunch. So we worked extraordinarily hard and extraordinarily fast. And it's that speed of work is important. I had an old boss at one point that, she said, I think her line was at any point, 80% of the decisions you make will be right, 20% will be wrong. And taking too much time to figure out which 20 is just going to be a waste of time anyway. So just plow forward, accept the fact that 20% of the time you're going to have to adjust, but revel in the 80.
Gotcha. Given that experience of move fast throughout politics and throughout Uber, did you ever consider maybe taking a slower path to entrepreneurship instead of the VC route? How did you decide between venture capital versus bootstrapping?
I think everything I set out to do was always kind of with a venture backing in mind. I enjoy that speed. I enjoy the team mentality that comes of having a shared mission and working really hard to build something that previously did not exist. And so for me, the culture of startups, now Uber had its cultural flaws, so not all of them literally, but that kind of culture where you're creating something from nothing, you're working really hard through sheer force of will build something that didn't exist yesterday. That's what I was drawn to in some ways more than the actual product we ended up developing over here at Enclave.
And how did you develop the product at Enclave?
I think I have a good investor or a good investor answer to that. But the truth is pure selfishness. So the team I was managing at Uber when I was, whenever it was 2020, uh, none of the none of the folks on my team were in Chicago. So I
Hmm.
found myself commuting downtown from the suburb. I moved to one of the western suburbs and was commuting downtown just to stare at a screen and talk to them via phone. It didn't seem to make much sense. So I started looking for options in the suburbs. And what I found, especially if you dig into the data, which you spend enough time at startups, you're just going to dig into data naturally, was kind of it was interesting. It highlighted a pretty big gap. Majority of the people in this country, especially white collar employees, live out in the suburbs. Suburbs are home to 4 times the amount of money. But at the time, 2019, only 10% of the co-working spaces were in the burbs.
Hmm.
So there was a clear mismatch between the infrastructure of work and where people actually wanted to work. I didn't know it at the time, but COVID would kind of light a fire under that market even more so. So in some ways, it was good timing, silver lining of a rough period, I would say.
Yeah. And this was the time when WeWork, Industrious, and all the other co-working startups were gaining a lot of traction in the cities, but you thought, I'm in the suburbs, there's not one of these here. Is that the thought process?
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember when kind of WeWork imploded a little bit. But even what I do remember though is looking at it and seeing these huge companies, Industrious, Regis, Rework, Mindspace, a couple others, all competing for exactly the same market, urban core, where they would build very, very large spaces, 50,000 square feet, and then rent space to giant companies. They were in fact a office manager landlord that had a much prettier, cooler culture. But nobody was catering to the employees themselves. They were just companies catering to the companies who employed those people. And so I thought it was kind of a nice niche, a nice market gap to cater directly to the employees and cater to them where they live.
So you had this idea and you had some data to support the decision. What was the next step? Was it going out to raise venture funding, or did you test the concept a bit prior to that?
Certainly the latter. So I called a buddy. We just convinced him it wasn't a completely insane idea, which I think he questions every now and then. And we both put up the money for the first one. And we built it out in Glen Ellen, Illinois, which is about 25 minutes west of the city. And we actually opened December 27th, 2019. Which, if you're ever building a co-working space, opening up 2 days after Christmas, generally not a good idea. And 3 months before a global pandemic, also not a great idea. But it worked. We kind of hit off to immediate success. And before we were shut down, we were broken even. We turned a profit before we got shut down in March that year.
How did you open up to such success? Was it through marketing, or how did you get your first customers?
Turns out that the market gap that we had kind of identified was really felt by people. So I think the numbers at the time were about 40% of white collar employees, again, the majority of whom lived in the suburbs, worked from home 1 to 2 days a week and had nowhere to really go except really loud Starbucks. And if you've ever been to a suburban Starbucks, if you're there after 3, it's a lot of high school kids. So it's not really conducive for work. And so I think we tapped into essentially a basic need. People want to split life and work. They don't want to literally sit on their couch and do work and be interrupted by dogs and delivery guys and kids. They want to have a separate life, and they really, really don't want it to be at the other end of an hour-long commute. So by building the infrastructure close to home, they're able to kind of give people a relatively high value offering. It's space that's conducive for work. It's simple, but it answered a real need that people were feeling. At least in 2020, nobody had really offered a scalable version of that kind of product in the suburbs.
Yeah. But tactically, what was getting the first members like? Was it passing out flyers, emailing friends?
You mean actually? How did you actually get the word out? There was
Yeah.
a lot of prayer. I did there was some actual marketing, some hacking. I think we dropped a little bit of direct mail. We did some Facebook ads, which a different buddy of mine helped me out because I'd never actually I'd placed ad buys, but never actually done the work to execute it. So that was something else I had to learn. We also just, I think I changed where I live on, I mean, it must have been Facebook at the time. Joined a number of Glen Ellen parents groups, working groups, other things, and just started randomly posting about it. And then once we caught on word of mouth, things happened pretty quickly. So
Hmm.
our seventh member is a guy named Jason, and he loved the space, signed on right away.
Yeah. And how did you even know what type of space to look for, how big of a space to look for, how to design it? Walk me through that process.
We didn't. We initially built the space. Our first location in Glen Ellen has no offices. So we built it with a conference room. We actually built it with a social element, a walk-in temperature-controlled wine cellar. So people could come by day and do a little bit of work or leave a bottle of wine and come in the evening and have a drink.
Hmm.
And other than that, it was wide open space. And we had the help of a designer at the time, and she came in and kind of helped us just buy furniture and set the place up so that it looked reasonably good. And then that worked. Now the model has changed since then. We've now become much more focused on work. There's a lot of offices, but we had to adapt as we scaled. We needed to figure out a way to enhance the revenue. So the wide open concept has gone away, and now we build much more closed off spaces. Have a new designer that brings in a lot more color to a space, makes it much more homey and comfortable. But what we found is that if you go into any WeWork or Regis in an urban core, they're built like offices because they cater to that office clientele. Ours are much more like I would say they're closer to a living room, one that's conducive for work without distractions, but much warmer than your normal office environment.
Yeah, that makes sense. And roughly how much did you have to spend to get that first space up and running?
I think that was about all in furniture, marketing was probably about 65,000 that we put up. And then, well, as I said, we turned our first profit a couple months later. The payback on that was rough because we were shut down there for however long that
Yeah.
COVID shutdown was. Yeah. But yeah, I think it was about 65,000, which actually has stayed pretty consistent with our builds, but we've also gotten more efficient and better with the builds as well.
COVID happens, you have to shut down for an extended period of time. Walk me through what you're thinking, what happens after.
Well, we didn't know. Like everybody back in 2020, I thought it was going to last 2 weeks. It clearly didn't. We didn't, but we had no idea how long we were going to be shut down. So we did some smart things, some less smart things. So things like, installing the weird plexiglass screens between desks that absolutely do nothing for COVID. But I think again, at the time, it made people feel more comfortable, including me. We also talked to some friends from my old politics days that were down working for the governor, and we effectively got, I would say, unofficial permission, but to stay open. The fear was if places like Enclave closed, more people would congregate in the Loop in downtown Chicago.
Hmm.
So by essentially giving us dispensation to stay open, we could essentially help limit the larger crowds. So we were able to stay open for those members who wanted to use it. I think we essentially offered to refund anyone who wanted it, but the community was great. They effectively told us not to, that they're more than happy to have us charge them. So we actually stayed profitable throughout COVID.
Oh, wow.
Our promise to not by a lot. It helped that I was the only real employee and wasn't taking a salary, but we stayed profitable. But our promise to members was we wouldn't add any new members. So we didn't grow at all, even though we stayed fairly consistent. But I think starting about September, October of that year, started to open up, look the other way, started to add members, and we kept growing until probably about March or April, which is when we was 21, which is when we raised that friends and family round.
I see. And how many people could you fit in that one space?
So we have it designed well, now it's designed for about 15 members at any one time. And again, there's still no offices. So that's about, right now, we've capped it at about 55 to 60 members. Somewhere in that range. And so that space is waitlisted. It's full and has been full for a long time at this point. So, but we usually do it based on a little bit capacity, a little bit noise. So when we open up a new location, we model it out. How many members can we have comfortably? We don't want anyone, to show up and essentially not have space because the churn will be too high. And frankly, it's cheaper, better business just to build a low churn community than it is to maximize dollars or maximize crowds and then constantly have to refill and find new people because they're all getting annoyed.
Yeah. And this is roughly like a couple thousand square feet, or how big are these spaces?
2,200 square feet. Our spaces have gotten a little larger over the years, so they average now about 3 to 4,000. So give or take, 10% of the size of a co-working space in where you're sitting in New York. So much, much smaller.
Gotcha. Okay, so April 2021, you start to go out to fundraise because the business has been profitable even throughout COVID.
Mhm.
Things are picking up, opening up. What are the steps to fundraise? Do you reach out to just your friends and family and ask them for introduction to VCs, or do you get a family and friends round first? How did you approach that process?
Well, I first off thought very highly of myself and my connections from Uber. So I thought that would be raising money would be a walk in the park. I would just
Yeah.
make two calls to people who had done very well in the Uber IPO and we'd be done. It absolutely didn't work out that way. The first time we set out to raise real money, I was able to sit down with a few people in VC world, and their recommendation, they had two real recommendations. One was that we have to have something unique, something special about us that would appeal to a broader VC audience. Like Suburban Coworking's cute, but what is it that makes you the winner of this space versus somebody else who opens up down the road?
Mhm.
And the second thing was that even if it was limited, I had to be able to show some ability to scale. So we ended up essentially, after probably about a month of trying and not getting anywhere, we just went immediately to that friends and family road with a pitch of we've developed some tech and we've developed an operating model that lets us operate these spaces with absolutely no staff. And by removing staff from the equation, we can charge lower prices than any of the competition. There's not a lot of competition in the space, but we can be underpriced or under their prices, offer a better value all at the same time. And that was kind of our something special. And then we went out and raised, I think it was about 200 grand. So not huge by any stretch from initial Enclave members was the bulk of it. And then a couple, very random, I should say, just checks that, we were able to get from our various networks. And with that 200, and the small profits that had been rolling off of the initial location, we were able to open up another three. And that got us to 4 locations by 22, which is when you and I met and we raised kind of our pre-seed round, a couple $1 million from you guys in New Stack.
Gotcha. So you got to 4 locations with a couple 100,000 just through family and friends before
Mm-hmm.
you met Bling and other institutional VC to raise the larger round. Tell me about the no staff policy. How does that work on a day-to-day basis?
So on a day-to-day basis, in some ways it's simple. So we've developed a couple things that make it possible. So right now, a team of 3 people in a market can manage up to 24 different locations. At least in theory, we've got 15 in Chicago, which is our biggest market right now. But that team of 3 should be able to manage significantly more, especially once we cap out. So the way it works is essentially it's automated entry. If you're a member, you can unlock the door with your phone. That's off-the-shelf tech. It works just like every other apartment building that you've ever walked into. But what we've done on the back end is tie that same system into a camera system, into noise sensors, motion sensors, and different types of software products that let us keep our finger on the pulse of a location without actually being there. So the example I always use is if somebody doesn't move for an extended period, my team will get a ping and they can actually go in and check the cameras and see what's going on. Someone move in? Are they sleeping on the couch? Did someone have a heart attack? Do we need to have some sort of emergency response? Are they just working very diligently and not moving too much? And then all of the various responses, they can talk through the cameras, they can call the person, they can call the authorities. It's one small example, but it lets my very, very lean team stay lean, which again is where our margins.
When I was working in co-working spaces, oftentimes I'd let friends in or let a couple people in who didn't have memberships. Do you face those challenges as well? And how do you solve that?
Definitely face those challenges, and sometimes people get away with it. It's kind of the risk of doing business. Sometimes if we hear about it, it's usually either from other members or happenstance. Like my team does rove around and check on things. We have cleaners that run around and see things. Sometimes we look on the camera for something completely unrelated and see a small army of people coming in together. It happens, and it's not something we love, obviously, but it's one of those things with a trade-off of having staff versus not having staff. In my estimation, at least, it's still better to not have the staff. If you walk in any co-working space right now, odds are the staff is not particularly busy. There's not a lot to do on that day in, day out basis, and they're managing 50,000 square feet. So think
Mm,
about how bored my employee would be in 3,000. There'd seem
yeah.
to be nothing for them to do, but most importantly, the revenue generated from 3,000 square feet wouldn't be able to cover that person's salary. You wouldn't be able to grow in the suburbs in these markets if you had staff on site everywhere.
Yeah. And then if people run into sort of technical issues or, there's a spill, I assume there's a routine cleaning that happens or technical
Mhm.
support on call anytime.
Yeah, effectively, they can email, call, text us at any point, depending on the level of emergency. We might reroute someone. There's a leak in one of our spaces today coming through the ceiling. I think we're in a larger building. I think it's from the apartment above. So the guy on the team who kind of oversees kind of maintenance and quality assurance in the spaces. I'm not sure where he was going, but he's now heading off to that particular location. So those things will happen. Most of the time, it's somebody didn't move the dishes or put the dishes away like they should have, and our cleaners just take care of it in the evenings.
Gotcha. So you have 4 locations. I assume they're profitable because you don't have staff and you have this cool new tech that is able to track. How is raising funding in 2022?
Well, the Blink team put me through the ringer. It was it was a lot of starts and stops. So got initially again sort of tried to do it myself a little bit. Ended up sending my deck out probably about, I don't know, 100 different VCs. Heard back from a couple, but the hit rate was certainly low. And then actually ended up getting connected to a guy named Mark Halpin who runs Kerosene Ventures. And Kerosene, it's not a VC. They essentially help connect founders. They pre-vet founders and then connect them to a stable of VCs who they've worked with in the past. And Mark is a recovering founder, I guess, and he's got a pretty solid reputation here in Chicago. He effectively had me pitch him. I somehow impressed him, and then he connected me to a larger number of founders, including Sam Yegan at Corazon and Nick Moran at Newstack. Once I think Nick offered to lead the round. Once the lead was in, then all of a sudden the wheels come off.
Yeah.
It's oversubscribed. And we had kind of our choice, and obviously elected to work with you and Nick as kind of co-leads of that first round.
Yeah. How big was that first round?
2.2 million all told.
Okay. And now you have a couple million in the war chest and the mandate is to set out to grow. What happens after? Tell me about what goes on.
What happens after is you should be careful what you ask for. Because now we have to spend all that money in a really smart way that promotes growth. Our goal is to grow to 150 locations by we raised a little bit later, but probably early 2027. There's been some good starts, some things that have slowed us down, but we've kind of made first inroads into new markets. So as of today, we should have spaces opening shortly in LA, Boston, and actually very shortly in Dallas as well. In Washington, D.C., which we had open spaces in before we raised this last round. We have 4 open, 3 under construction, and another 5 or 6 in the pipeline. And Chicago is growing too. So Chicago's got to grow from 15, hopefully to 20 in the next 6 months or so. So it's been a heads down, real focus on expansion, trying to build up the local city team so that they can kind of run with the ball. And so I take myself out of the weeds a little bit. And that's been a huge challenge. But all in all, I mean, things are moving in the right direction. They could always go faster, in my opinion, but things are certainly moving.
Yeah. So how many locations do you have open presently? And then how many did you say were planned to open over the next 6 months to a year?
So at 20 now, we should probably have another 20 opening before the end of the year, just given sort of pipeline. We wanted to be closer to 50, but it's taking a little longer to get some deals across the line. There was a lot of uncertainty, just economic uncertainty early this year around tariffs, and it doesn't necessarily impact my business in any way, but it did slow a lot of, especially bigger developers who would have the cost of construction would go up on imported parts, forced to pause. And so the earlier part of this year didn't move as quickly as we wanted it to.
Mm-hmm.
But now that some of that is behind us, we've started to see deal flow pick up again a little bit.
Yeah. And What is the difference between you opening that first location, not really knowing what's going on, to now the 20th location and the 40th location?
Yeah,
What have you learned?
I feel like, well, a lot's changed. So just in practice, the product itself has changed. Instead of a wide open space for 60 flex members, we now have 10 or 11 offices and space for 15 to 20 flex. So the product itself has changed. How we market to those people has changed a little bit. You got to work a little bit harder to find someone willing to spend $1,000 a month in an office than someone for just $100 a month to walk into to a lounge. So we've had to adjust a little bit there. We've also just gotten smarter in our deal making. So a lot of the stuff that I didn't know at the beginning, how do you get landlords to pay for your build out? What types of things should you be promising landlords? What types of guarantees do you give them over the long haul of a lease? What do you absolutely not do? Some of the things that sunk WeWork were the fact that the business essentially guaranteed the full terms of a lease at every single location. So if they had one bad performing location, it basically risked taking down the whole thing. And you saw the implications of that. Now, he did it that way because if you promise landlords everything, you can grow fast. And so our challenge is how do we carve out smart deals quickly? Because those two don't necessarily go together all the time. So that's been, I think, the biggest lesson. The other one is frankly just managing people, building culture. That's every management CEO storybook will tell you that. And I don't think I believed it until I went through it. But finding people, managing, and doing less as a result was certainly the biggest learning for me personally.
And how many people do you currently have on the team?
So now there's seven across all the markets, but we're hiring right now. We've got an open spot in LA, and we will shortly open up jobs in Boston and Dallas.
Yeah. And how did you manage people and culture in the beginning, and what have you learned, and how are you doing it now?
I didn't manage it in the beginning. I think I just thought it would happen naturally. So that's I'll kick myself for that on occasion. And how we do it now, I think honestly we're still learning. So it's a fully remote team. You have 15 locations in Chicago and a team of 3. They're not going to see each other, much less Self or the COO here, a guy named Tom. Both of us do a lot of traveling. We have to go to these other spaces. Tom also doubles as our lawyer, and so is reviewing all the leases. So when he's not traveling, he's hiding in a small dark room looking at legal documents. At least that's how I imagine it. So it's, in some ways, it's forced. Have to get the team together, have to figure out ways to socialize and make this a little bit fun. It's suburban coworking. It's not nuclear science. So making time for those moments. And I'm the one who has to do that. They can't come from, really anybody else. And in DC, same idea. It's less often, but trying to carve out a little bit of social, a little bit of fun with our manager out there, and kind of building time just or just in this calendar, regular time every week for let's hear about how the job is going. Let's not actually talk about different leases, deals, member issues, but just how are you feeling with the job? How is it integrating with your personal life? You have to almost ask the explicit question to drive the conversation that we used to have normally around water coolers, but not here, not at Enclave.
And why is culture so important? What are the actual implications that you felt with a bad culture versus a better culture?
Yeah, I think especially at startups, the motivation for people, why they're there, is extremely important. It can't just be the paycheck, because you're asking too much of these people for it to just be the paycheck. So some people enjoy the process of building. They just truly love creating something that didn't exist previously. Some people love the payoff or the potential payoff of the equity. But everyone is to be gunning in the same direction. At Fortune 100, somebody takes the day off, no harm, no foul. No one's going to notice. But at a startup, if you take your foot off the gas even a little bit at any position, you'll lose something because, that there isn't the machine that would just create and build as if you're at that Fortune 100 hasn't been built yet. So if an employee takes a day off, those things just don't happen. Not to say you shouldn't take time off. Vacations are important. You have to reset. But when you're here at a startup, you've got to be running through the brick wall as fast as you can. And that takes a special type of person and a special type of culture to do it. Their salary by themselves isn't going to be motivation enough.
I see. How have you decided opening new locations in LA, Boston versus other cities? And I'm also curious, just as a general market size for the United States, how many enclaves could there be?
How many enclaves could there be? We could probably put plus or minus 4 to 5 thousand enclaves across the US without really breaking a stride. So it could grow from there, but at a certain point, you're rolling the dice on certain neighborhoods. So there's huge parts of cities themselves that are effectively like suburbs. Roscoe Village. I'm assuming a couple of the boroughs in New York are, in a sense, large suburbs. Once you leave Manhattan, Phoenix, the sprawl there is incredible, and so even you could grow pretty massively in this country if you went into cities, even without going into the urban core. Um, so big potential for growth. Europe has even more potential. Would definitely be larger than the US if both markets were saturated. But so in a sense, going about picking a location or a market is hard because technically speaking, on paper, we could go anywhere. There are remote workers who don't want to commute everywhere. And while there's more to it than that, for sure, fundamentally, that's who we're catering to. And so you could figure out a way to appeal to those people in any market. We have the benefit of being able to cherry pick. So we used a lot of data, some from big real estate firms, the CBREs, JLLs of the world, to kind of narrow down which markets we thought were best. And then we went and visited them. So Tom and I both spent time in all of the cities, plus a few others, including some that were close by, Indianapolis, Minneapolis. And we essentially selected the ones where we thought had the most low-hanging fruit. Affluent suburbs, good sprawl, not a lot of competition. Where there was competition, it was mom and pop shops that delivered relatively low quality for quite a high charge. So we knew we could go in and win, but they all have their downsides. LA finding contractors is hard because of the fires earlier this year, whenever the
Yeah.
fires. And so every market's going to have drawbacks, and part of it is you just have to take the plunge and just say, okay, we're gonna, LA is our horse. We'll have to deal with the problems that come up when they come up because you can't predict it all.
Other people also doing remote access, no staff, or are you guys the only ones doing it?
There's two other companies that I know of, none in Chicago. In fact, I don't think either of them are in any of the cities we're operating in, that are trying to do a version of this. Now, the two I know of build larger spaces, 15,000 square feet, 20,000 square feet, and so are going to be more limited on where they can go. Most suburbs in this country, you just don't have 20,000 feet pieces of real estate to start with. And so we can go into a higher density of smaller towns, which is important for kind of the network effect that we're at least trying to go for. And so, no one is building as small as we are or as dense as we are in a particular market. I think both of those companies kind of cap out at 5 or 6 in a particular city, whereas we're going 24 is kind of the minimum because that's what maximizes the impact of my team. But Chicago should be home to 45, 50 enclaves capacity.
I see. And I know that you said you can price competitively because no staff, but what are other reasons that customers stay with Enclave, and what are some reasons that they choose to churn, and how are you correcting those?
So the retention has actually been really strong for us historically. Our offices tend to we offer pretty big discounts if they take out longer term memberships. So those don't churn very often at all. It's actually usually a surprise when they do. Our flex memberships are month to month, but they tend to be pretty sticky because we are pretty low priced. So we usually charge anywhere from $100 to $150 for unlimited access every month, whereas our competitors are usually in the 400s.
Wow.
So we're able to really waitlist most of our locations or get to capacity and then waitlist them. So even when there is churn, we pull somebody off the waitlist, slot them in, and there's no revenue churn. So that happens pretty efficiently at most of our locations right now. But people churn for all sorts of reasons. In Illinois, a lot of people we're moving out of state for whatever reason. The last few years, we're leaving Illinois. High tax situation probably. In DC, some of the the layoffs and some issues in the federal government put off a lot of contractors and consultants, impacted or created some churn for us. But for the most part, we cater to people who live within 1.5 to 2 miles of our locations, regardless of their job. They don't want to work from their living room. The 2-3 days a week, they're not going downtown. So the product stays pretty sticky.
Makes sense. What's the biggest hurdle for you getting from 20 to the 100 locations that you want to get to by 27?
I'd say there's 2 really big hurdles. So our model right now, our model might be the problem, but we don't hire a regional manager until the first space in a market is under construction. And what we're finding is that delays finding that first space right off the bat because we're doing it from afar, and there's only so many times you could get on a plane to go to LA to look at pieces of real estate, and how quickly can you get there and turn it around. Our model is more efficient financially speaking. We think is slowing down that initial expansion. It might be a trade-off worth making, but it's there. And then the second hurdle is actually finding that really good RGM in and of itself. So that person is really tasked with leading a team, expanding the market, growing the team, catering to members, managing maintenance issues. They have to be a jack of all trades, which, where that culture piece comes in. They have to be willing to roll up their sleeves and, sometimes do things they don't want to do, plunge toilets. Nobody signs on the dotted line and offer letter because they're looking forward to plunging toilets, but it's absolutely part of the job for that RGM, at least initially. The faster they grow the business, the less they do. But you got to find the right person. And so a lot hinges on that. We've missed with an RGM. We realized we missed quickly and, we made the necessary changes, but getting the right person in is absolutely imperative for Enclave.
Yeah. And is that the impetus for raising the most recent round where you want to get more capital to make sure you have that RGM in place before you even open the first locations?
That's part of it, though we've kind of ship had already sailed a little bit on that particular question, but the market shifted a little bit. Landlords are putting in less money to rebuild spaces than they were previously. So we have to put up more of the cash now ourselves on the builds. And then the other piece is we want to expand quickly. So we could grow kind of probably one location every, call it 3.5 months from cash flow. But we wanted to grow essentially, we want to be opening up 2 a month or so instead, grow really quickly and, be at a point in a couple of years where either we're clear acquisition target or we are able to cash flow and grow at that pace without taking on any more debt or equity. But we kind of wanted to use the venture round to take the business to the next level in a abridged fashion.
I see. I'm sure your time at Uber probably has a lot of experience and insights for helping grow regionally as, Uber launched in different cities. Are there a lot of parallels that you're seeing given your experience at both?
Maybe. I think the biggest parallel is you just need to sort of rip the Band-Aid off a little bit. There was a day at Uber early on. I think we launched 19 cities in a single day. And it was absolute chaos. The amount of things that didn't work, was incredible. But we launched the cities, and 3 weeks later, it all got fixed, and we were off to the races. And Uber was the first one in there, and the first to market, especially in ride sharing, was critical. And so that at least lesson has taught us that sometimes, even if it's not a perfect deal or we're making concessions we don't necessarily want to make, if they're within certain parameters, just go. Because it's better to be in the market dealing with problems than to be outside looking in.
Looking at over your experience building Enclave, over the last 5 years, is there anything that you would have done differently knowing what you know now?
A lot. I would throw, so design of the spaces, offices instead of open space, I think. But I think that the biggest thing is being willing to test more and maybe even fail more often. And it wasn't a fear of a failure or anything. I was financially risk averse. We didn't have a lot of money at the beginning. And part of what I wanted to take my message to investors was look how lean of an operation we are. We can't help but make a good margin. And when that's your mentality, your willingness to test and therefore lose cash on certain things, or at least mine went down. And I think if I could do it over, I think you can have your cake and eat it too a little bit. You can be lean, but also put things in a bucket. And VCs are smart. If I'd come to you and said, well, we spent $25,000 on strange marketing things, or these 18 marketing initiatives, and 6 of them worked and the rest didn't, here's why, but don't count this marketing budget because we were doing it as a test. It's never going to come up again. You would have understood that and you would have been able to run your numbers accordingly. And I don't think it would have changed the venture or the investment decision. In fact, it might have actually helped because you would have seen that I was willing to do those types of tests and was smart enough to kind of figure it out.
Yeah.
But I was nervous to do so at the beginning.
When you say tests, do you mean specifically marketing, or is it also other things too?
I think it's all things. We didn't invest a lot. We used off-the-shelf third-party apps, certainly at the beginning, instead of investing our own white labeled version. So it's tech. I think I just go to marketing because it's the easiest one to test. Like we could put up a billboard, track leads, see how it did. If it doesn't perform, take it down the next month. What's the next thing?
Yeah.
So that's kind of my go-to example.
Yeah, that makes sense because when you first started, you didn't have that much cash, and then you wanted to be a little bit more financially disciplined. But then,
Mhm.
as you raised, you sort of kept that mentality instead of testing more and doing more with the capital.
Yeah, and now I have to reorient. But what's harder is I need to reorient the team a little bit because we've all been raised up now to, be very reticent to spend money. And we've got to, that's still an important part of the company, but we have to do it smartly as opposed to just, blindly.
Yeah. Well, Bobby, this has been really awesome. Thank you for sharing your story about Enclave, and here's to you opening 19 cities, hopefully somewhat in the near future soon.
I'm excited. Thank you for having me on. This was fun.
Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, feel free to visit openingsoonpodcast.com for all of our episodes online. If you run a retail store and need updated furniture or signage, please feel free to visit www.signsandmirrors.com. Lastly, if you have any feedback or like to be a guest on the show, email me at alan, ALAN, @signsandmirrors.com. I promise I'll respond. Thanks for listening.